I self-custody, you self-custody. We go through our own proof of work to ensure that we are strengthening the network. And who's going to be responsible for that in government? I'm a class of 2020. Just like Michael Seyr. Is Bitcoin money? Yes, because I've used it as money and I interact with people who see it as money. So it may not be the global reserve currency, may not be on that standard. I'm against printing fiat to buy Bitcoin. That's just a ridiculous notion to me. As a boomer and as somebody who's lived a pretty long time and had a lot of experience around the world, I guess the message that I bring is don't rely on the government for any of it, because they're going to manipulate whatever they do with Bitcoin and they're going to make it difficult. The first time I saw the mempool and the first time I saw the structure of the time chain, it blew my mind because I'd done all this reading. I understand the philosophy, I understand the economics, the finances behind it. But until I actually saw that, that's why I was like, that's it.
Before we get started, maybe you can quickly tell us who you are and why you're into Bitcoin.
Yeah, my name is Daren Epstein, and I go by, my public persona is on X as the American Exile. And I got into Bitcoin because I'm a class of 2020, just like Michael Seyr. And it was around that I had been, of course, I have a lot in common with guys like Larry Lepard and some others in the space who are older, guys like me. I'm 60. And I had invested fairly successfully all my life in the stock market. And then when we saw, I'm in Japan, and when we started to see the first inclination that the COVID pandemic was going to take place. And that was around January here because there was the Diamond Princess ship in Tokyo where the first cases really started to publicly develop. And then some friends and I at the office I have one other friend who's a libertarian and is a gold bug. I was a gold bug as well, but we were mainly in the stock market. We were looking at I didn't know at the time that I was looking to reduce my time preference. But we had invested successfully in the stock market and we had done pretty well. We were both in the Department of Defense, and we'll get into that later as to how that, I'm not too excited to admit that, but that's how I made my money. And we invested mainly in stocks. Around that time, we anticipated that there was going to be a drop off in the market. So I went and I switched into gold, and around 2019, maybe the later half of 2019, I had already read the Bitcoin Standard because a friend of mine was a libertarian and he was familiar with Hans Hermann Hoppe and Ludwig von Mises and Rothbard. And so after I read the Bitcoin Standard and I was already going down the road to putting my resources in a sounder money, Bitcoin instantly made sense to me because I was already dealing, when we look at what the stock market is, and I know you talk about this with a lot of guests, we're already dealing with a digital currency. I don't get paid in shekels. No one comes up to my house and brings me stacks of paper. I get digits in my inbox, in my bank every month. And when you think about how those digits get created, and I know you've talked about it ad nauseum, that there's no proof of work, it's just somebody sitting on a keyboard. I was intrigued by this notion that there is a system, there's a protocol that accounts for a custody chain throughout its inception to its delivery to you. And I knew nothing about how exchanges worked or how wallets worked, but I learned, and I went through the first steps I did Coinbase, and I think I had a Trezor at the beginning. But I put a little bit into Bitcoin, and at the time, a little bit of ETH, because that was everybody was talking about blockchain, right? You know it well. And, but again, I'm 60 now. I was, 56 at the time. It instantly appealed to me because it just made sense because nothing else made sense. And gold makes sense to me, but I'm sure you've talked about ad nauseum. There's all the problems. associated with gold. So after getting into gold for a while, I took everything out and then mainly got back into Bitcoin after I sold out of the market in March of 2020.
Interesting. And I mean, we can get into everything, but first, when did you leave the USA? Was this already, were you still in America when this happened?
Oh, no. We have to talk about my life a little bit. So I enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1988, and I've basically been out of the state since then, for the most part. So I spent 3 years in Europe, in Germany, went to the first Gulf War. I spent 5 years in Korea, almost 20 years in Japan. So I've been outside the United States for the majority of the last 36 years.
Interesting. So, but in from the U.S. military, so you were sent here or on your own?
Yeah, so I was in the U.S. military from 1988 to 2010, and I was in Korea at the time. And I retired. I entered, so I dropped out of. I was going to university, and we can talk about how people get on their own journeys, like you were mentioning before. How old are you, Robin? Do you mind me asking?
Just 26.
26. Okay, so as a 60-year-old, I can't even remember what happened when I was 20. So when I was 26, I would have been a lieutenant in the Army in Germany. I probably would have been a first lieutenant. It would have been after I was in the first Gulf War, I think when I was 24 or 25. And so the Army was my life from 1988 to 2010. My wife's Japanese. We met in Japan around 1999. And then we got married and then we've had kids. We were stationed in Korea together. I decided to get out of the Army from Korea. And then I took a Department of Defense civilian job in Japan from 2010 till last year when I was kicked out.
And you said previously you were in the Defense Department and you weren't proud of it. Why that?
Well, no, it's just that, and this is, we may have some, uncomfortable discussions today about where we are in the Bitcoin journey. I think a lot of times I've been on a few podcasts and like Robin, I think I have problems with terms like the Bitcoin community because we are disparate people with different backgrounds of different races and different belief systems. And there's, and all those people got into this money, right? And of course we could approach it a ton of different ways and people could disagree with me. I just look at it, and I had listened to a excellent podcast the other day on Radio Rothbard between Ryan McMakin and Pierre Byland, who wrote an excellent book called How to Think About the Economy. And their discussion was, is gold and Bitcoin money? And so because I'm older and I don't need any kind of philosophical accoutrements to the thing that I think is going to have a certain use, right? I don't have to me, Bitcoin doesn't have to be energy. Or I know it's a protocol, but I'm 60. I have 20 years left on the planet. So whether it's an artist may look at it or a musician may look at it a different way based on their background. An engineer may look at it. Michael Saylor looks at it differently because of his background, because he went to MIT. So he can describe it as energy, and I'm not going to refute that. It can be all these things. To me, it's money. And when you're young or when you're older, as we go through life, we all have to figure out how we're going to make money, right? How we're going to gather the resources to live the type of life that we want to live. And so for me, when I'll start at 26, but I think I entered the Army at 24. I had left university because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had no real positive outlook. And then I decided for some reason that I would just enlist in the Army, because that's just something that Americans do. And my friends thought I was crazy because I was going to university and I was studying English and political science. and good university students, right? Like you may have your system, like in Germany, people go to gymnasium and you go on the university track. Probably the expectation is that I was going to be either a lawyer or a college professor or something like that. But I decided I just wanted some adventure. And so I enlisted in the Army, and I decided to go infantry and just do basic soldier stuff and go to airborne school and do all the things that to me at the time were not really associated with what my lifestyle was like. I wanted adventure. And I never thought I would stay in to make it a career. I had dropped out of school. I entered the Army as a private first class because I had college. But then I applied myself and did well. I was a good soldier. I liked soldiering, and then was able to go to university, was able to go to grad school, was able to live all over the world, was able to save money. And I think around the time that when I was a young lieutenant, captain taught me about investing. So I invested in the stock market early on, and I invested almost all of my disposable income into the market. And I did that since 1995. The reason why I say that I'm not really proud of it was you don't really know that you're a tool of the empire if you look at it that way, right? You don't know where you fit in historically into what your belief system will become. So, being a soldier, so I started to just have a bunch of questions that led to me having my moniker on X, which is the American Exile. I really don't feel like I fit in anywhere, fit into any country, fit into any system. I've lived so much overseas that somebody once said, I think it was Colonel Doug McGregor, said that a senior NATO commander said to him that the United States isn't a country, it's a planet. And it's like, it's just this separate entity from Europe when you look at how the United States thinks about things and thinks about the world. And when we look at, especially from the perspective of Bitcoin, when most people arrive at this place where, and I did it well before that, philosophically, I had these misgivings much prior to finding Bitcoin. That's why Bitcoin made sense. It didn't take 1,000 hours. It didn't take 100 hours. It took reading the Bitcoin Standard. It took reading the bullish case for Bitcoin. And then, of course, you just start going down the rabbit hole and you read everything. But it instantly appealed to my sense that when a nation state controls money, it controls resources, it controls everything. It controls freedom, it controls speech, it controls, and in our case in the United States, it controls the empire. And the empire isn't good. It's not a force for good. And so the fact that we have 800 bases overseas, that's, you heard the American national anthem, 5:00 every day, the base is 2 miles away. They blare it loud so that every person, every Japanese, maybe 20,000 Japanese people in the surrounding area get to listen to the U.S. national anthem at 5:00 every day, whether they like it or not. And I don't think that's a good look for the United States. And that's prior to Trump. And so Americans have, the way I see it, because I've been out of the country for so long, not all Americans, but many Americans have this sense that it's very Trumpian, that we can do whatever we want to do, that we're great. We're going to have these bases, whether you like it or not. We're going to project force from those bases, whether you like it or not. We're going to bomb people, whether you like it or not. And for most, nice people who don't, the normal person that doesn't want to make any waves, it's not even put on the news. And that's what we do with our empire. And we've been doing it for, way before 1945. You could say 1898, after the Spanish-American War. The United States continually expanded. And I was having this discussion with my son. We homeschool. They're orange pilled. That's another, we can get to that discussion about, what's the future look like and what are the things that we can do in the future to mold the future. But the reason why I'm not, look, I had a great time in the Army, and I wouldn't change a thing because it made me who I am. But when we look at what our empire has become, It's not a force for good in the world, and I have misgivings about having been associated with it. Does that answer that question in a way?
100%. And I'm just curious, you said the empire. Do you mean the US government or like the whole construct? Like what do you mean by that?
Well, the United States is an empire, right? So however you want to construct it, and it's beyond the scope of the podcast. I don't want to give a history lesson, but and my son and I were discussing this. And so if we just do a really brief, quick timeline from the beginning of the United States, and then this is a question that I had that we can pose at the end of our discussion is like right now in the Bitcoin community, do we anticipate that we're going to go through an evolutionary change to a Bitcoin standard, or will there be revolutions, right? There'll be some sort of spark that requires unfavorable kinetic interactions, war, revolution to convert to a Bitcoin standard. In 1763, rather, if you had asked the average American who was British, right, they're a British colonist, the French and Indian War, 7 Years' War, had just ended. If you had asked the average colonist what they thought about the British Empire, they would have looked at you like you were foolish. They were just colonists, and they were in the colonies, and they had participated largely in militias in the French and Indian War. After the end of that war, the British Empire was looking to recoup on the financial losses that it undertook fighting France for 7 years in Europe. It was a global conflict, but in Europe and in the Americas. So that's where we get that whole timeline of the stamp tax and the coercive acts and all of those things that led up to what we call the American Revolution. Lexington conquered that battle in 1775 occurred 250 years and 2 days ago. And so we can learn a lot from that experience when the colonies were going through a transition where they would then break away from Great Britain and become a republic, right? So we went through this whole Republican democracy. We don't really have to talk about the evolution from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution, but then very rapidly from that moment on, the United States started its expansion. So you went from 13 colonies. Then we moved west and took whatever land we wanted from whoever was there and couldn't fight the fight. Michael Saylor talks a great deal about this, and you can look at it scientifically, germs, guns, and steel, that the superior technology allowed the settlers to move west and displace the natives. But it's the same thing that we do today all around the globe, and it doesn't make it morally or ethically defensible. So, but this idea that, so the United States is not this altruistic, unique republic that seeks to do good around the world. We never have been. And from our outset, and it's always, if you read, Murray Rothbard's Conceived in Liberty, something, again, that Seyler recommends, or Patrick Newman's Cronyism. And I think the first one was from right from the beginning of the colonial settlement, the early 1600s through maybe the mid 1700s. I think he's written a part two. But this whole idea of the oligarchs of the time, the landed gentry, taking over the land as they moved west. And then 1803, we buy the Louisiana Purchase. We keep moving west, take whatever land we want. We eventually buy Alaska from Russia. That's why what I marked in 1898, United States fights the Spanish-American War. We get the Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico. Later on we take, Hawaii for good measure. And so the United States has been on this progression of moving outward. Excuse me. So when the current narrative is that the U.S. saved Europe in 2 world wars, then nothing could be further from the truth, right? The European powers, and you're in Vienna?
Yes, I'm in Vienna.
So, we could talk about that for forever, just the history Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottomans laying siege, to Vienna, Napoleon conquered Vienna, the Russians, Suvorov, on their way to Paris. So these, these historical epics, and all of those, especially Great Britain and France, had their global empires, and they maintained those global empires through the Second World War, right? The Netherlands were occupied, right? Austria went through the Anschluss, and and all of the European powers had extensive empires, and the United States was going to liberate Europe so that the Europeans could go back and take over their empires again. And in the United States, it's the same. Why does the United States fight Japan? It's really because we're in their neighborhood. We're in the Philippines, and we're competing over resources. So this idea that, and Patrick Buchanan wrote a great book called "A Republic, Not an Empire," controversial figure in American politics, but it's really proposes the theory that you can either be a republic or you can be an empire. And right now we are an empire because we have, we're on the dollar is the global reserve currency. We have 800 bases around the world. You see how we dictate trade policy. And it's not, by quiet negotiation. It's through coercion based on this idea that you can use force if you have to, because we're so used to doing it. And we no longer follow our Constitution, which says the Congress has to declare war. And we haven't declared a war since 1945. We went to Korea, we went to Vietnam, we went to the Middle East, everywhere, Grenada, Panama, Haiti, the Balkans. And those are the things that we know about. The United States is conducting military operations all over the globe all the time. And so when you live in that environment, and that's one of the things that as people who believe in a sound currency, that's why it's very hard for me to buy into notions like fix the money, fix the world. Right. I understand the sentiment, and I really want it to be true. And I really respect Lawrence Lepard and the work that he does, and other people who use that term. I want to be on that team. But there's a lot of things that we're going to have to do that might be uncomfortable, that have to prevent the current powers in charge of the current system from taking over the system that we want to replace it with.
It's exactly where I actually wanted to ask the question: if you think Bitcoin has a chance, or or will maybe bring those empires down, or not down, but change how they are structured, make them less appealing, because a lot of power comes from printing money and then being able to afford wars, afford military actions, afford those things. Do you think if we move slowly towards a Bitcoin standard, which I think will take a very long time, that those big empires get decentralized long term and get a little bit less empire-y?
That's a great question. And I don't I don't really have an answer, but I think the answer lies in what you said, which is you think going to a Bitcoin standard will take a very long time. And if that's the case, then, and I agree with you, then the answer is it's going to take a very long time. And so, and that's why I don't favor, I'm against a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I don't favor government to do anything. So I am not a socialist. I am the ultimate capitalist. I don't believe in public education. I don't believe in public health. I don't believe in any of these things, only because I don't trust someone else to do it. I want to be involved face to face. Now, that being said, there's, what is it, gradually, then suddenly. Is Bitcoin money? Yes. Because I've used it as money, and I interact with people who see it as money. So it may not be the global reserve currency. It may not be, may not be on that standard. In fact, because I interact with one of your sponsors, the Bitcoin Way, couldn't recommend them more. Fantastic. And they take Bitcoin. And so they're only in, and so anything that I say, any aspersions that I cast on Bitcoiners, and if you see my X profile, I'm always attacking Bitcoiners because I'm the harshest on our own team because I expect more, not you, not Bram Kronstein, not, there's a whole bunch of people out there that are just doing, Daniel Prince and Bitcoin Way guys. I'm friendly with those guys. And I often tell them, hey, this isn't towards you. I'm not a number go up guy. Does it make me feel, I wrote the little joke today to you, oh yeah, I arranged for Bitcoin to go up. I don't care. What really impresses me more about Bitcoin is what we just went through with the tariff shock and how well it stood up. That is proof of work right there. And so people can look, we're at, sorry, we're at 87,000, somewhere around there. If you had told me that a few years ago, I'd take that any day, right? When we were below that 64 dip, and I don't want to get into price because I don't price in fiat. I price in the amount of Satoshis that I have, and I know I agree with Jeff Booth that we're gonna get in a deflationary environment eventually. That's going to be good, and the amount of Satoshis that we have, right, in 10, 15, 20 years, you're not going to know anybody who talks in terms of Bitcoin. It's going to be talking in terms of Satoshi because who could imagine having a whole Bitcoin in the future? That's going to be pretty rough. But I don't support a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I don't support really getting in bed with government because that's the system we have to at some point overthrow and replace. And so for whatever good that Michael Saylor does, I'm against printing fiat to buy Bitcoin. That's just a ridiculous notion to me. And that Americans and then America wins. And then what does that look like? We maintain the empire for another 200 years? I don't want that. I don't want the empire. I don't think of myself primarily as an American as much as I do as a human being. And so if we look at things like the Hanseatic League, right, in northern Germany, or the German principalities before 1870, and the consolidation of what we now call Germany. It's these I think we're going to go to that model eventually. I'd like to see the empire break down. I'd like to see secession in the United States, and people start to identify politically with economic zones, with lifestyle zones that reflect a lack of interference in the free market. And so when I think of how a free market works, and that's why I like to do podcasts with people like you, is that how the hell did we arrange this, right? How is it that some guy living in Tokyo communicates with a guy in less than half his age in Europe, and they work out somehow without coercion or interference or a mandate to have a discussion about serious issues? And that's, to me, that's the free market at work, right? It didn't take any interference. We have similar ideas, maybe, about Bitcoin, maybe some differing ideas. I know you because you are on a mission to engage with as many people as you can in this space. And you've been on that mission for some time, and I followed it, and I appreciate the work that you do. You're the hardest working man in show business. And it's a fascinating thing to listen to. And I listen to people that I agree with or don't agree with, but that's the market developing. And that, what you do, Robin, and what others in the space do, that gives me hope because that shows that the market will develop. And I'm 60 years old. and I should be a boomer, right? I am a boomer. I should be in this category of people that don't get it, but somehow I do. And if I can get it, anybody can get it. But as a boomer and as somebody who's lived a pretty long time and had a lot of experience around the world, I guess the message that I bring is don't rely on the government for any of it, because they're going to manipulate whatever they do with Bitcoin, and they're going to make it difficult. And it may seem like it's very positive what Trump is doing right now. Trump doesn't understand Bitcoin. He doesn't. He doesn't understand anything. He's being fed information, and the next person might not be that friendly towards Bitcoin. And if that's where we are, we know when we have the saying that Bitcoin doesn't care. I want Bitcoiners to get more aggressive, right? And act like people who are involved in something that can't be manipulated, right? That we as a community can manage and can control, and that we will get together and fight for it, however that looks.
It's super interesting because I'm very split on the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Obviously, more buyers in the market is usually good for an asset. But at the same time, we are mostly for freedom go up technology and not for number or money go up technology. And if we really want freedom go up technology, as you said, it can prolong that government standing. I don't think it can save them, but I think it can massively extend the life of a money printer. I think even central banks, if they buy Bitcoin officially or indirectly or unofficially, they could prolong their life a lot, especially the Fed, so the U.S. Federal Reserve. And they already are in what I think 60 countries with the US dollar, where the country itself does not have any other currency, which is an amazing stance to have from the perspective of the Federal Reserve. So the strategic Bitcoin reserve is interesting. There are people that describe it as a Trojan horse against governments, but then also the dangerous aspect of it, of like, hey, maybe they can prolong or extend life longer than we wanted to, and kind of have the division of a Bitcoin standard later because the government is buying it. It's I think Jeff Booth, as you mentioned, Jeff Booth, I think he made that term famous. He got asked what is the worst thing about Bitcoin. He said that it's permissionless, so also our enemies can buy Bitcoin. So that's I think a good angle to look at it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, this is an art. It's not a science. I have, because I spent 36 years in the government, I have zero faith in the government. And my fear is what they'll do is they'll buy up whatever, 1 million Bitcoin. And so they say, look, I self-custody, you self-custody. We go through our own proof of work to ensure that we are strengthening the network. We run a node. We defend it publicly. And who's going to be responsible for that in government? Is it going to be at Coinbase? Is it going to be the same place where the Fort Knox gold is, where nobody knows where it is? And I think it's going to be too convenient to say, well, we're going to hold this as a store of value, and then we're going to issue a U.S. stable coin off of it, and there's your CBDC. And so, as the CBDC is concerned, my thoughts are we already have it. And the reason why I say, and this isn't a leap, I'm sure other people have said it, you don't get paid in paper or gold. You get paid in digits, right? So they can shut my bank account off now if they want. They did it in Canada. Look, I can work on Bitcoin, but It's not, that's not going to pay my mortgage. And I'm in Japan, right? So my life is Japan, United States. Japan is a vassal of the United States. The yen is based on the US dollar. It's favorable for me right now, the exchange rate, but everything here is done in yen. So the hard work of building a CBDC, same thing with Bitcoin. Computers have been developed, networks have been developed, all the pipes are there. Bitcoin was, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's easy to understand because if you've been in the digital world and you receive, you've got mail, you got money. If you see your bank account go higher because the Department of Defense has given me money, I know that for any reason, they could shut that off if they wanted to. So I'm in the CBDC now. When somebody says, well, we're just going to use a stable coin. What if they didn't even say it's a stable coin? They just go with what they're doing right now. It's not really a leap to get to some sort of stable coin. And to say that we're going to base it off of Bitcoin, then that gives me concerns about what they're going to do to zero out the debt and some other things that I'm sure that people like Jeff Booth consider, really smarter people than me, consider what the problems are. And then we get to the most important question that we never talk about, which is the spending. And so, and like you said, Bitcoin like I said, Bitcoin underwriting a stable coin could perpetuate the system so that we can continue to spend. But Robin, whether they do that or not, they're not stopping spending. And by they, I mean the United States in particular. So we just said we're going to have $1 trillion defense budget to defend against what? I don't know. The European Union's going to spend what, 800 billion so that Russia doesn't invade. They're going to spend what you don't have, and the quality of life is going to continue to go down. Life is going to get more challenging. Inflation's going to, we know the story. And we are not at the point yet. And I think until there are people in the streets saying, marching and revolting in some way. And I know some people don't like that. But at some point, you have to shut the spigot off. And for some reason, Americans were foolish enough to believe that Trump was going to come in and be more responsible. And he's not. It was like on day 2, he announced the $500 billion to Larry Ellison and Sam Altman to do the cancer AI vaccine thing, the $1 trillion defense budget, money going left, right, and the whole, I don't want to get on the whole Doge thing, which is a complete scam. It's not going to cut anything. And then the way the U.S. government works is, and they know this, anything that gets cut will go into litigation. And there's an entire system in the United States called administrative law. And the administrative system is where civilians go to make their grievances through the Office of Professional Management. I was in this system, and they will go and they will make claims, and it will get litigated, and the administration will lose. And all of those civilians will get hired, and USAID will be turned back on, and they'll all get back pay. And they know that. That's the way the system is. If you want to cut government, you don't bring in some external agency to do this Band-Aid measure. You tell Congress and you tell your congressmen and women to stop spending and to cut it. That's a function of government. But our system doesn't work, right? And the EU is a collection of unelected members to a parliament that European citizens in their individual nation states get no vote in. And so when they make these pronouncements now that are getting more and more aggressive and are going into the military realm now, people have no connection with that. And at some point, that's got to come to an end. To turn it back to a discussion on Bitcoin, Bitcoin gives us the option that we didn't have before, I believe, and you believe. that there is an out, there is a superior alternative. But if we're going to go down that road, every one of us in the system, in that new system, whether you're somebody in Nigeria who doesn't have a bank account and is able to get through a cell phone, able to use Satoshis to buy something, or you're Michael Saylor, everybody gets an equal vote in that system. And from the bottom up, from the localities through the states or the prefectures or wherever it is that you live, it's going to be from the bottom up that these markets form, I believe, based on communities and community priorities. That's going to give Bitcoin that chance. But between now and then, what that looks like, I don't know.
Let's take a break for a moment and appreciate the beauty that Coin Vigilante has made with the Bitcoin watches. Those watches are the most amazing, the most elegant way of showing that you are a true Bitcoiner. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. And now if you have Bitcoin, I really do hope that you don't have it on exchange. But if you do have it on exchange, I have two ways for you to deal with that. The first way is you put it on a hardware wallet. That's the entry for you to get into the self-custody game. I recommend BitBox, Bitcoin only edition for that. It's a super simple and secure way. And if you check out the link in the description, you even get 5% off if you use the code Robin. And the second way is the Bitcoin Way. The Bitcoin Way is your all-in partner in terms of how to get the most out of your sovereignty. They will personalize for you a self-custody setup that is perfect for your individual situation. They will show you how you can secure your own devices. Securing your Bitcoin is not enough. You also have to keep all your devices secure. One topic that is overlooked often is the inheritance plan. What happens with your Bitcoin once you are no longer here? Do you have a plan for that in place already? And last but not least, if you're in jurisdictions where you don't feel safe, it's better to get a plan B. For all that, head over to thebitcoinway.com/Robin to get a 30-minute free call. And just a quick side note, I will be for the first time ever speaking at the Bitcoin Prague event in June. It will be absolutely legendary and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you there. You can get your ticket in the link down in the description of Bitcoin Prague, and very important, use code Robin to get 10% off your ticket. I'm really looking forward seeing you there. It's a two question that we still have. Like most Bitcoiners are very, like I'm very convinced that we will get to this Bitcoin standard eventually, or to a sound money standard. I most likely think it's probably Bitcoin, and then on the way there, there's a lot of question. Do we come peacefully there? Do we come through civil wars, other wars there? And how quick is this going to be? Like, is it like slowly, then gradually, then suddenly, or is it like this gradually till we'll get there? Is there like some peak moment in there where all of a sudden it makes sense and we have 1 year where we go from 1%, 5% adoption to like 50, 60, 70% adoption? I think it's probably longer. It's probably more organic. But yeah, I could be wrong on that. History will teach us. But we mentioned it right in the beginning, where we are in the Bitcoin journey. How would you describe it? Where we are currently in the Bitcoin journey, how far we are along, and how inevitable do you think it already is?
I think, and this is where, I think as we go along this timeline, we are going to discover that there's less in common amongst us, because at the beginning of the journey, we all had one thing that we believed in, and it's Bitcoin. And then as we go through the journey, we start asking more questions about each other, and we start finding out. You may find out things about the person that end that relationship, just like in life, right? I don't keep in touch with anybody from high school or from university. I have some Army friends. You may end up having more Bitcoin friends, or depending on, I have more jujitsu friends. I have more, Army's probably the most. But one of the things that I kind of get frustrated with in the so-called community is that, look, and this is one of the reasons why I say, fix the money, fix the world is a little bit problematic. You can have Bitcoin, but you could beat your wife, right? You could have Bitcoin and be a drunk. You could have Bitcoin and be obese. You could have Bitcoin and all sorts of different things. And one of the things that I see most flagrantly is you could think that Bitcoin is the thing that you need to know about and do research about, right? What I tell my kids is life is like, imagine you have a table and you have a bunch of cylinders like this on it, say 100 cylinders. And right, you only have so much time, right? We talk about that time preference or whatever. And you can choose to go down into some of these cylinders, which represent journeys. And you could decide, like my kids do jujitsu, they do weightlifting, we do homeschooling. You could go down and there are people that go all the way down, right? You can call it the rabbit hole if you want. And there are people that live in that Bitcoin, right? In the Bitcoin tube. I don't. I understand what it is, and I think I get how it works, and this has nothing to do with anything, but because I still map out things in my mind. But the first time I saw the mempool and the first time I saw the structure of the time chain and and blocks form, it blew my mind, because I'd done all this reading. I understand the philosophy. I understand the economics, the finances behind it. But until I actually saw that, that's why I was like, that's it. There was an emotional moment. And I think it's an emotional moment for a lot of folks. Same thing when you set up your own wallet or, but we have to be aware that at least these other things exist, and that those things may be impediments, right? There may be something going on in one of those tubes that affects your life more than you being in the Bitcoin tube, right? So if you're not paying attention, if you're not reading geopolitics, and my space is the geopolitical world, not Bitcoin. It's conflict zones. It's where my government is spending money and resources to kill people today. And as a matter of policy, sending its troops all over the world, our naval forces, to bomb Yemen, right? That's what the United States does right now. We haven't declared war. I have nothing. I don't wake up in the morning and go, damn those Yemenis. I hate them. I don't hate the Chinese. I don't hate the Russians. I don't even hate the Austrians. And so, but my government takes my tax resources and does these things with them. So if I'm not aware, at least tangentially, of what's going on in some of these other cylinders, I shouldn't be surprised when at some point, well, I think I'm doing everything right. I'm homeschooling. I eat healthy. I'm retired. I'm lowering my time preference. I've figured out Bitcoin. And somebody knocks on my door and they put me in handcuffs and throw me in jail because I made an unpopular statement about the government. Whether that's in the UK, whether that's in the United States. And the difficult thing for Bitcoiners is it gets very much to be a gray zone when they take somebody off the street and they ship him off to El Salvador, and they put him in a notoriously violent prison that's run by one of the Bitcoin heroes. And to me, because I'm a human being before I am a Bitcoiner, that all look, I don't I don't get into this Bitcoin beach and using the Night Lightning Network and all that, and interviewing people in front of the volcanoes. That's great. If that's your thing, do it. It does nothing for me. Because I've realized in my life there are no heroes, right? Everybody that they told me was a hero, like Abraham Lincoln, turns out to be a psychopath. So when Bukele goes to visit Trump, and he wouldn't have got asked if he didn't agree to the prison deal, you have to start being able to question who your allies are. And if he went on X, and because he speaks perfect English, and said, hey, I know this is a bad look, and I'm reviewing everybody that we put in prison. I don't want to have this, I don't want to appear to be some sort of typical Central American thug, but it's not a good look at the very least. And so the problem is if you're going to be in a photograph with anyone. So now there's Trump and Bukele. And whatever any of those people are associated with it, and I don't mean to just pick on them, they're two of the most egregious, I think. Everybody has to associate with what their historical narrative is. Whether, people in popular American media like RFK Jr. or any of these people, when they say certain things, when they do certain things, when they're in photos with certain people, they have to be scrutinized. I don't care if they say positive things about Bitcoin. Right? And so in the military, we would do analysis, right? Intelligence preparation of the battlefield, IPB. It's what DOT is notorious for. It's what the NSA does. It's what CIA does. When I was in graduate school, my mentor was a CIA analyst. And he taught us how to analyze information that would be pertinent to the leadership. And then we would write up reports and send them up. And so if I took somebody and didn't scrutinize their entire life, right? RFK Jr., he's got a pretty sordid background. And if you're going to ignore that and just say, well, he said positive things about Bitcoin, or he said positive things about vaccines because it's my thing, I'm going to come back. Like if you were the CEO of our company and you said, Daren, I'm going to make an investment in a company run by these people. I need some background. Okay, I'll go and I'll do it. And if I come back and I give you the dossier on RFK Jr. or somebody else, you're probably going to go through it and go, I don't want him watching my kids, let alone making a multi-billion-dollar investment that involves him. And I'm not implying that towards RFK Jr. I'm using an example because he's an egregious example of a public figure who's been out there for many years. There's a lot of information on him and it's out there. Same thing with Elon, same thing with Trump. And so when we're going to get to the point as people who appreciate this money, where we're going to say, I don't know, I got to take a look at the Trump tariffs and see if they're good or bad. If you haven't worked out ahead of time, if you're somebody that's into Bitcoin and you haven't worked out that tariffs are a bad idea, that they're a drain on the economy, I know that as a first principle, right? And then I'll just go through, and I'm on Mises.org right now, and I'll read all that stuff. And I've read it over and over and over. And when we talk about the free market or the free market of ideas, we are talking about a paradigm where there aren't external negative forces that impact the freedom of entities to interact, right? So ultimately, what we are talking about with Bitcoin, my vision for Bitcoin is end to end, peer to peer, right? It's a peer to peer electronic cash system. And that if I want to buy something from you, I go online, I go click, I buy it, I send you my sats, you send me the thing, and by word of mouth, we build out and say, I did it with when I bought my node, wherever it was, and they DHL comes to my house end to end. We don't need governments. Sorry. We don't need governments. We don't need interference. We need the market. Bitcoin can do that. Governments are rapacious because they add nothing. They don't make the product. They don't put the desire in me to separate with my money to buy that product. And they they want to get involved in the marketplace because they have to extract their resources so that they can go spend $1 trillion on the Department of Defense so that they can go bomb people that I don't know. I know it was a little bit of an aside, but kind of interconnected.
I love the last line, how they do it. It's so interesting because there are a lot of Bitcoiners that clearly just want number up. They clearly is like, okay, I love an ETF. I don't care if I custody it myself. They even say like, oh, I diversify, I have some self custody, like I have some ETF and stuff like that. And if we look at the numbers, most Bitcoiners don't even have self custody. If we actually look at like, if we declare everyone a Bitcoiner who has Bitcoin, then most Bitcoiners by far never touched a hardware wallet or did anything close to self custody. So it's an interesting question. Like, what is a Bitcoiner, and how do we get to a Bitcoin standard? How does this Bitcoin standard look like? And will it be I think you said revolution or evolution? So with how peaceful will that transition be? How do you look at those two different paths towards Bitcoin standard?
Yeah, and I think that what you said really made me think, because I didn't really think about it until you said it. Of course, I've heard it, but the fact that people don't self-custody, maybe that's why I look at it, or we look at it the way that we do. And because I bought into this whole notion that Bitcoin doesn't care, right? TikTok next block. And then when I get, right, and I'm not, like I said, I'm a boomer, I'm 60. I'm not supposed to understand this stuff. But if I can understand UTXO consolidation, right, and if I can understand how I'm going to manage my own bank, be my own bank, then I start to question, why do my resources have to go anywhere? I already paid taxes on the money that I earned to buy the Bitcoin, right? I pay income tax. So I paid taxes on that, and I chose. It's the same thing in in investing. So rather than buy cocaine or do something unproductive with my money, since I was young, I invested it. I put it in IRAs, and then the government charges me income tax, and if I want to use it take it out of an IRA, I've got to pay capital gains tax. I've got to pay, or if I have a non-retirement account and I have to pay short-term or long-term capital gains because I chose to invest it and I made money off of it. And I'm not a multi-billionaire and I can't hide it in a tax structure, although I can to an extent, but it's not cost effective. Like Seyr talks about in the Bitcoin standard, and like he talks a lot on his podcast, once I have this thing where I can be my own bank, then it opens up all these possibilities. But what frustrates me, it's just like what you said. I'm indifferent about an ETF. Probably I would prefer that it not be there because it's the same old. Larry Fink is not a good guy. He's just so. And like I said, there are no heroes. Michael Saylor's not going to jump in to pull you out. If you fall into the ocean, he ain't jumping in. I'm just telling you, he doesn't have the moral character or five. That's just I know people are going to get all pissed off. I like Michael Saylor because I invested in MicroStrategy. Why did I invest in MicroStrategy? Because my money was trapped in a U.S. Tax deferred, like a 401k system, and I can't buy spot Bitcoin. And although Charles Schwab just announced you can buy spot Bitcoin, but if I buy spot Bitcoin there, unless I can export it to a hard wallet, and it's all KYC anyway, I know that. You're dealing with compromises, and so I like Michael Saylor because his company did very well. I bought it like 2.5 years ago, and it went on a pretty good run. And I like that he is an evangelist and he makes number go up for MicroStrategy. That's fine with me. But I don't expect anything from billionaires other than them wanting to improve their bottom line. And that's okay. That's the responsibility. He's not going to come out and speak out against Bukele. He's not going to talk about them shutting down free speech on college campuses. He's not going to be that guy. But we're going to have those people, and those, because ultimately that's how you defend the network. Because what's the point if we're sitting on a pile of the perfect money and we can't speak freely, and we can't educate our kids the way we want, and we can't expect to have a free life so that that our time preference goes down and that our lives improve. So, and then back to this kind of idea of the cylinders, you might say, hey, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to do Bitcoin. I'm not talking about you, Robin. You have to. It's your job. But I'm going to ignore this militarism in Europe, right? And then in 2 years, right, you get conscripted. And now you're in the front lines in Ukraine going, what the hell? I'm a podcast host. What am I doing here? That's what happened in 1914 in Austria, right? And then the world just caught flame. So there's going to be external forces that maybe control your life if we don't take the opportunity at some point to speak out against the things that we disagree with that our current government is doing. So when I talk about it's not going to be fix the money, fix the world, I'm just saying that can't be the bromide that we use for everything. Well, I'm going to sit around and I'm just going to buy Bitcoin and I'm going to hodl and I'm going to do my thing and I'm just going to let the world do whatever it does. And then, and that's fine. But let's not preach that we're better than any other normie because we've got a better money. We can't say it then. At some point, we have to back it up. At some point, when people are getting thrown in jail for freedom of speech or for violating speech codes or laws, or when people are getting bombed with our tax dollars in the current fiat system, let's not conclude that what we have to do is to strengthen that system with Bitcoin.
That's the reason why I was into politics before I was in Bitcoin, and I was basically on in a youth organization of a political party. The more and more I got into Bitcoin, the more and more I got out of that. Funny enough, and now basically the last, like, let's say half year to a year, I started to again pay attention to politics. Not because it's fun, but because I see that politics very much can not control my life, but yeah, they could control my life, but definitely they have an impact and influence on my daily life. So because I live in Austria, I have to pay attention to what is the Austrian government doing. and what is the EU doing? Those are those two things above me. So the same in America. If you live in I don't know, or Arizona, I don't know, Florida, wherever you live, you have to state level and then also federal level, and you've seen what are the politics things. And then if you want to go beyond, you see a little bit geopolitics, like what are the things. But I think you also have to be careful to not just consume politics all day long, because I think then you forget that you actually have to do something with your life. So, but I think it's important to pay attention what's going on in the world, especially to those things that impact your life. For example, in Austria, we have every few weeks a parliament session where all the parliament comes together and discusses what's changing in the law. I always listen to all of those sessions. First of all, it's not a lot. It's just like every few weeks there's like and one day in session. It's a quick listen, and you can skip through it. You don't have to listen like 12 hours. You can basically listen to like, probably takes me 2 hours to get through the whole thing with 2x speed and stuff like that. And there are a lot of Bitcoiners that actually say, I have Bitcoin. I don't have to care about politics. Yeah, maybe you don't have to. You don't have to go on. You don't have to make your own political party or like call every senator. Maybe it's a good thing to do that, but you don't have to do that. But at least see what's going on so you can react. Because Bitcoin will probably be fine. Like Bitcoin doesn't care about politics long term, but you should, you might care what's going on with politics. And maybe Austria is a bad place to be in for Bitcoiners. And if it turns out that way, and if I listen to the news, I might catch it early enough so I can move to, I don't know, Tokyo, America, wherever I'm treated better as a Bitcoiner. So I do think listening to the news is something that can hurt your health, because it's like they're always negative news and stuff like that. I don't like that part. But it's important if you want to defend yourself, if you defend your wife, if you want to defend your family, and if you want to see where the world is going. So I very much agree with that message of it's not just Bitcoin. And actually, that's why I have the last question of the last question from me in the podcast. What can we learn from you besides Bitcoin? Because I want to put more and more out, and that's also the reason why I don't call it what Bitcoin did, Bitcoin for millennials. Like all the Bitcoin podcasts usually have Bitcoin in the name, as it's better for marketing. Yeah. I decided not to do that. It's just a Robin Seyr podcast. First of all, maybe I'll speak about something else, and then people cannot say, "Oh, this whole podcast you didn't talk about Bitcoin." Yeah, it happens. I had a podcast with Lisa Huff, and we talked about parenting and homeschooling. We mentioned, and I can search in the transcript, we mentioned Bitcoin 3 times. When I had Seyr on, we mentioned Bitcoin, what was it, 150 times, or almost 200 in like 1.5 hours. Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's important to have interests outside of Bitcoin. And second, it's very important to see what's going on with your local news and a local jurisdiction, and then also the waterheads above it, be it the Federal Reserve, be it the EU.
Yeah, I agree. And I didn't even realize that about your podcast. And so I think that's very wise, because I think, say we do reach a Bitcoin standard or something, there's going to be a lot less to talk about at some point. I mean, you might be my age, but and I'm mostly active, on X, being just a, sometimes I'll go back and read some stuff, and I'm just like this angry old man. And a lot of it is just because I watch the things play out, violence being committed around the world. And and that's why I don't really buy into this notion of America first. I just have never been, maybe it's because I've lived all over the world, but like you said, you use the term, go where you're treated best. And I've always liked that sentiment, and I believe that's why I ended up in Japan, where Japan's got its own problems. It's got their government is just too big and bloated. They have too much public debt. The population is crashing because no one can afford to get married and have kids. But it is a fantastic place to live. And for me in particular, where I retired with a decent amount of money, Bitcoin allowed me to retire. I was forced out of DOD because of I was on a COVID task force. I refused the vaccines. And Austrian economics believing Bitcoiner is not going to go very far in the Department of Defense. And eventually, your opinions about everything, about war, I'm anti-war, I'm anti-state. And at some point, we, as what I'll say about people who have arrived at Bitcoin as being money have gone through some sort of metamorphosis. They've gone through some sort of thought process. And most are fairly thoughtful people. So I will, I'm very guarded and careful to say things about the community or whatever. But, when you run into people, it turns out that a lot of people are carnivores, or a lot of people like jujitsu, or a lot of people homeschool, Lisa Hoff. And I've listened to her on several podcasts. I think I listened to her on your show. We have differences. We have similarities, mainly because I have sons and we lift weights and do jujitsu and do, manly things. But going where you're treated best, Japan is, and you may see there's a lot of videos on X about Asia now, and especially Chinese trolling Americans for, well, you want the tariffs, you want to do these miserable jobs that we've been doing. And in Japan, it's a high trust society. I live in Tokyo, kind of a more, suburban area. I could leave my doors open 24/7. If you leave something on the train, somebody will, you'll get it. You'll go to Lost and Found and it will be there. There's no public violence. People aren't yelling on the trains. They're quiet. Sometimes the trains are crowded. I don't know the last time I've seen a policeman. They have them in certain areas, like in the Koban or whatever, but it's not like in the States where it's militarized. They don't have police SWAT teams here. Just, you can drink beer publicly, or, it's pretty chill. And say, and I think that's a perfect way to encapsulate it, Robin, in that I don't spend, American politics sickens me. So I can't spend a lot of time listening to, because everybody in the legislature is a loser. Trump is, I'm just not aligned to any political party, but Trump's been a bozo throughout my entire life. And I am more conservative than Attila the Hun. He is not conservative. I am an arch capitalist, meaning in the traditional sense, in the Seyfedin Ammous sense, and that capitalists are people that take money and invest it in capital and then develop businesses and products like capital goods to create consumer goods that we all use, and that eventually over time, if you don't have a rapacious government, you get into what Jeff Booth is talking about. You get into a deflationary cycle, and the currency that you're using, especially if it's not, or the money rather, not the currency, because it's not issued by a central government, that we can survive off of that, and then we can figure out what we need in that marketplace. And so I'm going to go to you and say, hey, I got a back problem. Do you have a good chiropractor? Or no, but I know a guy who knows a guy. And in the private market, you're not going to be set up with somebody that's going to try to get you to take a vaccine that you don't want to take. You're outside of this allopathic system, right? If I go over to your house to eat, I'm probably expecting that I'm going to eat something that is not going to kill me. And so I keep up with politics as far as I understand what the threats might be. So if you decide that you want to go where you're treated best, and I decide where I want to go where I'm treated best, and that happens to be Panama, and we communicate with each other, and then you do this like plan B, like Bitcoin Way has, and you go through that process, and you're like, okay, well, I know Robin's here. I know a few other people are here. In that society, depending on what your belief system is, my belief system is to be armed. You can be armed in Panama. And then we look out for you. You have to go to Austria. You have to go to a Bitcoin conference. Daren, can you watch my place? I got it, man. And you know you can trust me. And so you've got this community of people. Can you teach my kids English? Sure. Can your wife teach my kids German? My wife teaches my kids Japanese. That's just going to work itself out. And I do believe at the end of the day that we're going to get to that type of system and that we can build out those communities. But at some point, we may have to have some sort of at least political confrontation with the powers that be to ensure that the empire is not going to come knocking on your door. We've all seen Star Wars, right? It's not good when the empire arrives. And so Panama, that runs on the dollar, that's really, you can see the United States, Trump says, I want the Panama Canal back. And Trump says, I want to send prisoners to El Salvador. That's how the Western Hemisphere has been for, 150 years. And so that's going to affect every one of us. We're not going to be able to run away. At some point, we might have to make some sort of commitment. And I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if it's violent or nonviolent. But at some point, people like us, or rather people older than you, my generation, especially, let's say Republicans, always used to say, well, this isn't the hill to die on, right? So abortion isn't the hill to die on. Yeah, but I'm against it. But it's not the hill to die on. Gay marriage is not the hill to die on. Whatever your belief system is. If you're a Republican, you're probably a Christian conservative. Maybe not. But if you have similar belief systems and you say, this is not the hill to die on, don't be surprised when you find yourself 15 hills back and you're overrun because you've given up all the terrain. And if what we've decided is that our hill to die on is this permissionless, perfect, decentralized money that we all agree is money and that we're going to use to exchange with each other, if we decide that's the hill to die on, damn it, at some point we've got to defend it.
I think that's a perfect way of ending the actual podcast. We have two more questions. The first question, as I already teased, is the question that I asked each and every one of the guests. And the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
What can you learn from me besides Bitcoin? Don't trust the government.
Love that. Maybe there are some Bitcoiners that also learned that from the from Bitcoin.
Yeah, and for Americans, it would be, there's just so many things, but in particular, I always tell people, don't let your kids join the military. In the United States, I think you learn a lot of great things in the military, and I think it was a wonderful experience for me. And my kids won't. I've just trained them too well. And then something else is to be as self-sufficient as you can. And I know you probably are, Robin. You look fit. That means eating right. That means exercising. That means taking care of your health. Your health is number one. Look, your health, your family, whatever your relationship is with God, your morality, your sense of ethics, loving your fellow man, having respect for your fellow man. The 10 Commandments are probably a pretty good guide, but maybe they've been too politicized. The non-aggression principle. I don't wake up any day. I'm a lifelong soldier. The life of the soldier is not to kill people. The life of the soldier should be in a republic to defend the population. And unfortunately, my population, my military doesn't do that anymore. It spreads pain and grief around the world. And I wish nothing but good tidings for my fellow man. That's all.
I love that. Really cool. We have the second question is the end routine question, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the question from the previous guest to you is, what do you believe the deeper philosophical purpose of Bitcoin is?
Yeah. I think the deeper philosophical purpose of Bitcoin is that at least it gives me the opportunity to live a freer life. And so, despite everything that we said about government, about external forces and powers actively trying to limit our freedom, if I'm allowed to, and that even if we have a fight for the freedom of Bitcoin, and if I'm allowed to go where I'm treated best, I know that we don't have to go through using seashells and barter, etc. I know that we have the perfect money, and that gives me an opportunity to be free in the future, and it gives me hope.
Love that. Thank you so much, Daren. That was awesome. Before I let you go, where can people find you and ask you questions? I think Twitter is the best place for you.
Right now, it's Twitter. Daren Adam 8, the American Exile. You'll either love it or hate it. I'll eventually, I want to do a podcast, which is kind of a anti-government, freedom-based type of thing. But I've been very busy, and I think even on other podcasts, I said I'm the producer of the forthcoming American Exile podcast. But for right now, it's X. And feel free. I'm just in the kind of the liberty freedom space. I spend a lot of time on the Middle East right now. And that's it.
Really cool. Thank you so much, Daren, for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.
Thank you.